Stop.
Yesterday, the President of the United States decided that he was going to hold another one of these open meetings with Democrats and Republicans in front of the cameras. Now, usually in front of the cameras, the President tries to please members of both parties. The President, above all, is a performer, right? He's a guy who's on reality TV. He's been on the cover of every magazine. He's been performing every single, all the time for years on end. And that performance does not stop just because he's the President of the United States. When a camera is on, when the red light is on, he's performing. And what that usually means is that he's trying to cater to the people in the room. So when he's performing at CPAC and the red lights are on there, he's saying what CPAC wants to hear. And when he's in front of the NRA, then he is saying what the NRA wants to hear. And when he is in front of a bunch of Democrats and Republicans, he's saying what he thinks a lot of the Democrats want to hear. And that's basically how it went yesterday. Now, we're going to analyze this on two levels. One is, did he mean any of this? Is it real? And two is, what did he just say? Because we sort of always have to separate out these two things. What he said and is it important? These are two separate questions because the president says a lot of stuff. A lot of crap comes out of that face. So the question is, was the stuff that he said good or was it bad? And two, was it important? We'll answer the second question first. I don't think the stuff that he said was important. He's going to have to get through legislation through Congress. Republicans run Congress. They're not going to do any of the things that he wants them to do here because they don't have the votes for it. The reason I say this is because the president did exactly the same thing with DACA. You recall that he had a meeting with a bunch of Democrats, and at that meeting on DACA, he specifically said that he would be fine with passing a clean DACA bill. We mocked him up and down for it. It was ridiculous. He said that he was fine with a clean amnesty bill and no border security measures. And Kevin McCarthy, the House Majority Leader, had to jump in and say, Mr. President, you mean that you want border security? And Trump said, yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, I want a clean bill with border security, which is not originally what he said. Now, of course, all of his overtures to Democrats in that meeting meant nothing. The same thing is probably happening here on guns, but it is important to note the president only became an advocate of gun rights relatively recently. Up till 2012, the president was a gun control advocate. The president was not a big fan of guns. And so when it goes back to the gut level for President Trump, when he goes back to his gut on this issue, there are certain issues where the president's gut is very much in line with sort of conservative policy. Guns are not one of those issues. On guns, this is a guy whose gut is from New York, and New Yorkers, people from New York City, they're not particularly big into the Second Amendment rights of all of it. So the president has this meeting yesterday, and he says a bunch of things that are just laughably awful. So he starts off in a conversation with Pat Toomey. So Pat Toomey is the senator from Pennsylvania. Now, in order for you to understand how absurd it is what President Trump says right here, you have to understand that Pat Toomey is one of the leftmost members of the U.S. Senate on guns. So in 2013, it was Pat Toomey who proposed a piece of legislation in the aftermath of Sandy Hook with Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia, a Democrat. And that piece of legislation would have forced federal background checks for any sale of any weapon in the United States except between family members or close friends. So if I wanted to sell a gun to somebody in the office with whom I was not friendly, then I would have to go to a federally licensed firearms dealer. Now, the only way to enforce that, the problem with this policy, is the only way to enforce that law is that you actually have to have a full gun registry. Because in order for the government to keep track of how I sold my gun to somebody, they have to know that I owned the gun in the first place. Right? A federally licensed firearm dealer keeps records with the federal government. They know how many guns are in that gun shop. And so when that firearms dealer is requested for records by the NRA, by the ATF, then the ATF knows that where the guns were, how they were transferred, and all the rest of it. That would have set up a gun registry in the United States. Gun registries are a really troubling concept. You really don't want the government knowing who has a gun and where, because it's none of the government's business. There are two purposes to the Second Amendment. One is self-defense, in which case you don't really care about the government knowing you have a gun. And the second is being free of government tyranny. And in that case, you really don't want the government to know who has how many guns and where. And obviously, there's a certain amount of knowledge the government has with regard to federally licensed firearms dealers, but having a full gun registry is not quite the same thing as all that. The government would have to come into your house and check every so often. The government would have to figure out whether you were telling the truth. The government could theoretically charge you with perjury for lying on federal forms if you did not fill out the forms properly in these hand-to-hand transfers. In any case, the Manchin-Toomey bill went down to defeat. It got 54 votes in the Senate. It could not hit 60. But Toomey, who had proposed it, was bucking the NRA when he proposed that. So Toomey, actually, his NRA rating was demoted from an A to a C. And it was demoted from an A to a C. Not only was it demoted from an A to a C, in 2014, the NRA declined to endorse Toomey. So they had endorsed Toomey in his last senatorial race, and then they unendorsed Toomey in 2008. So that's how seriously the NRA took all of this, and that's how much at odds Toomey was with the NRA. Well, Trump, because he always wants to be the guy saying the brashest thing in the room, he starts ripping into Toomey for some reason and suggesting that Toomey is a tool of the NRA, which is just idiotic.
Just doing something on this background check issue and using that as a base, and then I would like to add some of these other things we've talked about, I think would make a major difference.
So if you could add that to this bill, that would be great, Diane. If you could add what you have also, and I think you can, into the bill.
Yeah.
So
Joe, are you ready?
Can you do that? Joe, can you do that? Pat, can you?
Okay, so sorry, that's it. So that's the second clip. I actually needed the first clip. We'll discuss what exactly that one was. Here's the first one, he rips to me, and then we'll discuss what that one was, where Dianne Feinstein is chortling like a little girl. This clip.
It doesn't make sense that I have to wait till I'm 21 to get a handgun, but I can get this weapon at 18. I don't know. So I was just curious as to what you did in your bill.
We didn't address it, Mr. President. Look, I think
You know why? Because you're afraid of the NRA, right?
Not an issue. No, the NRA
5 years ago.
Yeah, it's a big issue right now. A lot of people
Look at all the staffers. Even Manchin is going, he's not afraid of the NRA. He and I partnered on the legislation. What the hell are you talking about? But Trump is accusing Toomey of being afraid of the NRA, which is just great press for the NRA, considering the entire Democratic Party and the media have been claiming that the real reason Republicans are pro-gun is because they're afraid of the NRA. So well done, Mr. President, for doubling down on that idiotic message. Then the president went even further, and that's the clip we're about to show you where Dianne Feinstein jumps for joy. Amy Klobuchar, who's the senator from Minnesota, she suggests that they add an assault weapons ban to Manchin Toomey. So not only would there be a full gun registry, now you would not be able to buy an assault weapon, meaning any rifle in the United States that has a couple of features added to it, like a pistol grip and a certain type of barrel, for example, or a sight. If you added those things, if the gun looks scary, it's an assault weapon. Republicans have opposed this forever. Amy Klobuchar says, why don't we do it? And Trump immediately says, yeah, let's wrap that up into an even bigger gun control package. And watch Dianne Feinstein's reaction. Dianne Feinstein is 84 years old, but suddenly she's a little girl again. Dianne Feinstein, she's been my senator virtually my entire life. She's been senator here since I was 10 years old, Dianne Feinstein, or 9 years old. I have never seen Dianne Feinstein smile, ever, not once on tape. Like there's this myth that once Dianne Feinstein smiled and a rainbow came out. Like she's not a big laugher and a big smiler. Okay, watch as she turns into a small child clapping for glee, like my kids when I give them chocolate when Trump says this about assault weapons. It's really amazing.
Just doing something on this background check issue and using that as a base, and then I would like to add some of these other things we've talked about, I think would make a major difference.
So if you could add that to this bill, that would be great, Diane. If you could add what you have also, and I think you can, into the bill.
Yeah.
Joe, are you ready?
Can you do that? Joe, can you do that? Pat, can you add some of the things? You're not going to agree with me.
If you help.
Well, no, I'll help, but can you add what Amy and what Diane have? Can we add them in? And I know you can add what John
I
has.
have another.
Okay, and look at the Republicans. They're all like, what is going on now? Like Cornyn, who's sitting right next to Trump, you can see he's putting his hand to his mouth like, this can't be happening. This isn't real. Like, Trump really doesn't know what he's saying here. And Dianne Feinstein knows exactly what Trump's saying. Again, she's 84 years old, and suddenly she's my 4-year-old daughter. She's so gleeful. If you are saying things about guns that are making Dianne Feinstein gleeful, let me suggest that you have undermined the Second Amendment and that you are not standing with conservative ideas on the Second Amendment. Okay, then it gets even worse. So he turns to Cornyn, who's sitting right next to him, and he says, you know what we should do? We should actually do a comprehensive gun reform, like a big, big bill, like a big historic bill. And you can see Cornyn going, what the hell is going on? Like, was he dropped on his head this morning? Did he wake up on the wrong side of the bed? Was it invasion of the body snatchers? Like, what in the world? Look at John Cornyn's face here.
And John, Fixed Nix has some really good things in it, but it would be nice if we could add everything onto it. And maybe you change the title, all right? The U.S. background check bill or whatever. But your bill is really good and really important, having to do with a certain aspect. But maybe we could make it much more comprehensive and have one bill instead of 15 different bills that nobody knows what's happening.
If we can get 60 votes for it, Mr. President,
I think
I'm all
you can.
for it.
Honestly, I think, look, I really believe this is one of the things we...
Cornyn steps in, he goes, Mr. President, you're acting like a child. We need 60 votes, and we're not going to get it. So the president, of course, just completely overlooks this. It was just ridiculous on every possible level. And it gets even more ridiculous. Okay, so this is the thing that is most ridiculous and had people really up in arms, as they should be. So the president is talking about, so Vice President Pence starts talking about a proposal that was first made by David French, a proposal that I backed, for gun violence restraining orders. Gun violence restraining orders are a process that we have here in California where close family and friends can apply to a court to have your gun rights temporarily suspended if they show, past a certain burden of proof, that there is evidence that you are a danger to yourself or others. And then there is a hearing. Right, so there's due process. So the due process can go in a couple ways. You could have the hearing before the guns are removed, or you could have a preliminary hearing in which all of the evidence is shown, And then the guns are temporarily removed because we don't want people sitting around there with guns. And then the guy realizes that the cops are going to come take away his guns. He goes, shoots up the school. Okay, so you can have due process in the sense that you have the right to confront the accuser, but it's done on really spontaneous, quick basis. Or you could have like a full drawn-out hearing. But both of those are due process. So Mike Pence explains the proposal, and Trump proceeds to pile drive the proposal. Trump proceeds to take Pence's proposal, the gun violence restraining order proposal, the David French proposal, and he proceeds to say something so wildly unconstitutional and so wildly unconservative that it boggles the mind. I mean, if Barack Obama had uttered these words, we would all be up in arms. The reason that it's different if Obama had said them than Trump saying them, honestly, is that Obama knew what he was talking about on these issues, and Trump clearly doesn't. Anyway, here's Mike Pence saying something smart, and then Donald Trump following up with something so egregiously stupid that minds of small children were blown all over the country.
Because a lot of times, by the time you go to court, it takes so long to go to court to get the due process procedures. I like taking the guns early, like in this crazy man's case that just took place in Florida. He had a lot of firearms. They saw everything. To go to court would have taken a long time. So you could do exactly what you're saying, but take the guns first, go through due process second.
Okay, that's not what due process is. The reason this is a problem is not because anybody wants mentally ill, violent people to have guns. Nobody wants that. But it is astonishing to me that the same people on the left who are afraid of Trump becoming an authoritarian are sitting there laughing with glee when the President of the United States says somebody applies to have somebody else's gun rights taken away, and we should all just shrug. I mean, honestly, that's what the President of the United States says right there. The President of the United States just said that you should be able to go into the police, should be able to go into your house. I should be able to go to the cops and say to them, my next door neighbor's crazy, and not show any evidence, right? There's no due process. I just call up and I say, tip, next door neighbor's crazy. And the cops go and take that guy's guns and maybe arrest him, right? And then later comes the due process. We fought an entire revolution to prohibit this sort of thing. We fought an entire revolution so that there would be a right to habeas corpus, so you know why you're being arrested and your rights are being violated. We fought an entire revolution so there are no ex post facto laws that were specifically designed after the fact in order to get certain people. None of this is part of the constitutional order. But the president, who is a Republican, was sitting there saying this stuff with a straight face.